The Mandalorian's hand twitched towards his darksaber, but the shadowy figure was faster. Djarin's arm moved immediately to his neck, which was constricted under a force choke, until IG-12 initiated a defense sequence for his master. The assassin droid stepped in front of Djarin and fired off a series of erratic bullets, striking the floor, the ceiling and the walls. The robed figure used a combination of acrobatics and force abilities, but in their efforts, the hood was removed to reveal a wrinkly, balding man. Little did Din Djarin know that he had just faced Snoke, who had been attempting to torment Grogu. The sound of the duel had awakened the dormant base, and the rapid footsteps from around them would quickly become stormtroopers, all pointing their blasters at the Mandalorian and the droid. Djarin knew that he could not win this battle. The eyes within his helmet panned from side to side, and he saw no obvious way out. Djarin gently flexed the vambraces on his wrist, and he felt that he still had several whistling birds remaining. As the stormtroopers raised and prepared to fire, the Mandalorian flicked his wrist and sent several of the small explosives around the corridor, and ordered IG-12 to leave. The droid was reluctant to override its programming, but on Djarin's second order, IG-12 evaded the blaster shots from the stormtroopers and found a path to the hangar. As the ships exploded behind the droid, it managed to find an unscathed prototype TIE fighter and flew out of Tythera's First Order base. As the Mandalorian's hands were put in binders, he watched as the TIE fighter flew into the distance, and he knew that at least IG-12 would be able to get back to the tribe. Snoke ordered Djarin to be dragged into the elevator, and hidden from any of Tythera's inhabitants, he was taken to a detention centre and placed in a torture chair. Under the watchful and disdainful gazes of Snoke and two First Order officers, the new IT-000 model interrogation droid circled the Mandalorian. While Snoke had allowed Djarin to wear his helmet, he did so to mock the so-called old Mandalorian ways, and removed the rest of his armour to leave him exposed. The interrogation droid was similar to the Imperial IT-0 model, and also like a medical droid, it started to inject the Mandalorian with a truth serum. Djarin was used to such methods of torture as Snoke continued to question what he knew of Grogu, and the dark side user ordered for more implements. In the second round of torture, the IT-000 droid used a combination of a sonic torture needle and a shock device that started to weaken the nerve endings of the Mandalorian. But despite the screams of pain, which reverberated off the walls of the room, Djarin continued to resist, and Snoke decided to use the Force. The clone of Sidious intensified his focus, and used a mind probe, which allowed him to access Djarin's thoughts and memories, and he saw Grogu's attachment to the Mandalorian, then his reluctance to be taken away by Luke. Snoke released his captive from the chair, and ordered him to be taken away, and Djarin was dragged into one of the cells, and sealed by a laser gate. During his torture, IG-12 had made its way to Mandalore, and following the route that R5-D4 had taken, the droid informs the tribe, that now included Bo-Katan, that their leader had been captured. Without Djarin, the tribe had no one to tame the mythosaur, and it was too late for them to turn back. As they looked up from their temporary base, which was located just within the entrance to the old civic centre, it became apparent that the recent arrivals had not gone unnoticed. The squadron of TIE bombers and TIE interceptors flew in formation and unloaded their assortment of missiles on the already scarred landscape. Vizsla orders the tribe to retreat below ground as R5-D4 and IG-12 decided to leave the atmosphere of the planet, and they settled on the moon of Concordia, where the Children of the Watch had previously taken refuge. The sudden downturn in the fortunes of the Mandalorians had not gone unnoticed at the Jedi Academy on Ossus, and like his previous vision of the suffering on Tatooine, Grogu was willing to consult Luke. If the Jedi must have been concerned with the previous vision, that was nothing compared to the darkness echoing from his latest vision. Luke hadn't sensed such evil since his encounter with Darth Sidious, and all the recent events, from Leia's vision on Ajan Kloss to Grogu's vision of Tatooine, and finally the rushed arrival of Ben, all pointed to one thing: the Sith had returned. Whilst the younger Luke would have rushed into battle, this older and wiser Luke went to one of his newly constructed rooms in the academy, and with R2-D2 and a medical droid observing him, he lowered himself into a sensory deprivation tank. Luke had heard about the ritual from Yoda, who had undergone the same process during the Clone War, to communicate with Qui-Gon, and as Luke started to become one with the Force, he started to hear voices. Past Jedi such as Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda and Qui-Gon told him he could choose between Typhera and Mandalore, but there was no guarantee that everyone could be saved. Once the ritual was completed, Luke retreated to his quarters to rest, and as he gazed out at his new students, his mind was clear. He would travel to Typhera. Luke decided to take his students, as he feared their solitude on Ossus, and Han Solo soon arrived in the Millennium Falcon. The smuggler was not pleased to be involved in another skirmish, as he had been planning to clean his reputation now that he was married to a politician such as Leia, but he still took them towards Typhera. Han had heard suspicious activity on the planet from Leia, and these suspicions were confirmed when they were faced with a squadron of TIE fighters. Luke and Han took their positions as gunners, and with Han outmaneuvering the pilots, they descended to the planet largely unscathed. Around several hundred meters above the ground, Luke leapt from the ramp and onto a tall comm tower, and as the sound of the Falcon's engines receded into the distance, he felt a cold chill of evil shudder through his spine. The Jedi saw the military base, and the insignia that had risen in notoriety, but raising the hood of his robes above his head, he carefully evaded the stormtroopers. Several well-timed mind tricks and distractions later, Luke disguised himself in a stormtrooper uniform, just as he had done to save Leia, and after overhearing the capture of the Mandalorian, he descended to the lower levels. Luke was mistaken if he thought this would go the same way as his rescue of Leia, when he came face to face with Snoke. The dark side user sneered at the Jedi, and Luke could feel some of the darkness of Sidious within him. Snoke raised his fingers for a lightning attack, but this time Luke was prepared and raised his lightsaber to defend the attack. This was just the beginning for Snoke, and he soon switched to probing Luke's mind, but the Jedi turned the tables and called Snoke a mere shadow of a real Sith. The face of Snoke twisted into a familiar grin as Sidious started to take over, and Luke saw Snoke reaching to a black blade, so he knew he had to end the battle quickly. The Jedi raised one of his hands and pulled down some of the metal girders on the ceiling and dropped them onto the possessed Snoke. Wasting no time, Luke deactivated all the gates to the cells, and Djarin trudged out. The Mandalorian gratefully thanked Luke, and retrieving his armour from a nearby locker and his darksaber from Snoke's belt, they walked outside to find Han lighting up the base with his laser cannons. With the anti-aircraft cannons still unfinished, Luke and Djarin leapt onto the ramp of the Falcon, and Djarin informed them of the situation on Mandalore. Luke convinced Han to travel to the planet, all the while being troubled by the words echoed by the Jedi Masters. This was not helped by the lack of communication between Djarin and the Mandalorians, who he could only assume had descended close to the mines. After travelling for several days, the Falcon and its crew arrived to a quiet Mandalore. Djarin guided Han to the entrance to the Civic Centre, and in front of the cave, the mythosaur was still where he had left it. After feeding the beast with some of the alamites strewn across the cave, Djarin rode the mythosaur with Luke, and they followed a trail of debris and scorch marks across the landscape. The trio eventually spotted a discreet sinkhole-looking crevice, and Imperial commandos rose to the surface to greet them. Igniting their blades, Luke and Din Djarin attacked the commandos without fear, slicing through the weak points in their Beskar alloy armour, and the roar of the mythosaur shook the now visible hidden Imperial base. Having fought for several days, the Mandalorians had been on the brink of defeat, and it was only Bo-Katan's efforts to stall Moff Gideon and the defence of the IG-12 droid army that had prevented their downfall. The mythosaur swooped into the cavern and lashed its tail across anything it could find, and the Mandalorians were freed from their capture. As Moff Gideon emerged from the main hangar, he used his whipcord to try and tie the mythosaur, but he used his sharp teeth to rip the cord to shreds. As Luke leapt off to help any stricken Mandalorians, Gideon dived with his flamethrower ignited and headed for the mouth of the mythosaur, but he was caught in the wave of the roar. Gideon proceeded to be engulfed in his own flames and flung from side to side by the beast until he was dropped to the depths below. As Djarin looked up, he saw the Millennium Falcon and the faces of Grogu and Ben Solo looking excitedly at the chaos. Luke had successfully rescued the Mandalorians and planned to return to the academy, hoping the darkness would never touch his students again. That is it for What If Grogu Chose to Become a Jedi. If you'd like to see another What If, feel free to leave your suggestions in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you next time.